When I first discovered Siralim Ultimate, it looked like exactly the kind of game I tend to enjoy. A monster collecting RPG with hundreds of creatures, tons of progression systems, and enough depth to keep me busy for a while. Instead, I'm over 100 floors deep, I've built multiple teams across several different classes, and somehow I still feel like I've barely scratched the surface of what this game has to offer. As I kept playing, I realized that while Siralim Ultimate absolutely is a creature collecting game, that's really just the foundation. The real magic comes from building ridiculous combinations, discovering powerful synergies between creatures and classes, and constantly finding new ways to make your team stronger. And after spending over 40 hours with it, I honestly think Siralim Ultimate might be the deepest monster collecting RPG ever made. At its core, Siralim Ultimate is a turn-based monster collecting RPG. You build a team of 6 creatures, explore randomly generated realms, complete objectives, collect resources, and gradually make your team stronger. There are over 1,000 creatures to collect, dozens of specializations that completely change how you play, hundreds of traits to mix and match, spell gems, artifacts, trait fusion, and enough progression systems that I'm still discovering new things even dozens of hours into the game. Something I thought was pretty cool about Siralim Ultimate is that it didn't appear out of nowhere. It's actually the 4th game in the series. The developer created Siralim, then Siralim 2, Siralim 3, and eventually now Siralim Ultimate. It really feels like each game built on the ideas of the previous one until the systems became absolutely massive. The result is a game that feels almost endless, and that's where things started getting dangerous for my free time. The moment this game really clicked for me was when I discovered trait fusion. Up until that point, I was still enjoying the game. I was collecting creatures, clearing realms, unlocking new things, and steadily getting stronger. But trait fusion completely changed the way I looked at the game. Instead of looking at creatures individually, I started thinking about all the different ways they could work together. Every new trait I found opened up more possibilities. Not because I necessarily wanted to use every creature I discovered, but because almost every creature had the potential to be useful in the right team, with the right class, or with the right combination of traits. Then I started unlocking more classes, and that's when I started to understand that this game might actually be endless. A Hell Knight wants to build a team differently than a Paladin. A Paladin wants different creatures than a Monk. Every time I unlocked a new specialization or class, I found myself thinking about entirely different team compositions and strategies. What started as a creature collecting RPG slowly turned into a giant sandbox for experimentation, and before long, I found myself constantly thinking about new combinations I wanted to try the next time I logged in. If I had to point to one thing that keeps bringing me back to Siralim Ultimate, it's the build crafting. A lot of games give you meaningful choices when you're building a character, but Siralim takes that idea and cranks it up to an absurd level. Every creature has its own trait, and those traits can be fused together. Classes have their own perk trees that completely change how you approach team building. Artifacts can completely change how a creature functions, and spell gems add another layer on top of all of that. What I love is that you're constantly finding interactions you couldn't think of. The classes and creatures aren't operating separately either. The real fun comes from finding creature traits that work perfectly with your specialization's perks. Sometimes you'll unlock a new class, read through the perk tree, and start thinking about entirely different creatures that suddenly become interesting. Then you add artifacts into the mix. Eventually, artifacts can inherit traits as well, which means every creature can effectively contribute up to 3 traits to the team. By the time everything comes together, you can end up with a team built around 18 different traits, all interacting with each other in ways you never expected. One of my favorite examples comes from my Hell Knight team. I had a Centaur Raider whose trait allows it to attack random enemies after an enemy dies. Then I paired it with a Centaur Ranger who gains extra attacks based on the number of spells cast since its last turn. The Hell Knight specialization has access to Pyromania, which is a perk that gives your attacks a chance to cast Flame Strike. Flame Strike itself doesn't do a lot of damage, but it's the cast that matters. So what started as a single enemy dying could suddenly turn into multiple attacks, a bunch of Flame Strikes being cast, and then even more attacks from the Centaur Ranger. And that's not even counting all the different attacks and Flame Strike casts coming from other parts of my team as well. So watching all of those interactions chain together feels incredible because it was a combination that I theory crafted myself. And that's the feeling that Siralim keeps chasing. You find a new creature, discover a new trait, unlock a new class, and suddenly you're wondering what other combinations might be possible. Speaking of combinations, let me talk about a couple different classes or specializations that I've experimented with so far and tell you how I felt about them. My first serious class was Hell Knight. With Hell Knight, I was constantly looking for ways to deal more damage, trigger more attacks, and create bigger chain reactions. It felt aggressive and explosive, and watching entire enemy teams disappear because of a combo I put together was incredibly satisfying. The Hell Knight is widely regarded as one of the more beginner-friendly classes that you can get into. You're really just focused on trying to maximize the number of attacks, extra crit damage, splash damage to other enemies, and it's one of the more simple ways you can look at your team and try to build around those types of things. Then I unlocked the Paladin. The Paladin is interesting because it's more about absorbing damage and reflecting it back on the enemy. I found myself building a team mostly focused on total maximum health and surprisingly little defense because the idea is you want to take as much damage as possible without dying and then reflect all that damage back on the enemy. So I was surprised to realize actually building a defensive team wasn't really the right call. It's more about building for maximum health and then provoking the enemy into attacking you rather than attacking yourself so that you can reflect all the incoming damage back on your enemy. It was a pretty interesting option that I had some fun with. The last example I'll talk about in this video is the Monk. The Monk actually surprised me the most because it ended up being the most powerful team I was able to build. And I built this team myself, just looking through all the different traits, all the different perks, and built the team focused around the Monk's specialization, which in this case is dodging. You can still make your own attacks and do damage that way, but you get extra damage because when the enemy attacks into you, you are highly specialized at dodging those attacks and then counterattacking for more damage. There are different perks and traits that allow you to attack multiple times after dodging an attack. So it's really kind of an evasive tank build with all the perks of having damage as well because you are attacking into the enemy and then they attack into you, which you are dodging and then counterattacking for even more damage. Not to mention it synergizes with the speed attribute quite well. So you find yourself at the top of the timeline and being able to get in a ton of damage right off the bat and then dodging the incoming attacks and then counterattacking for even more damage. It's a lot of fun to build around that kind of playstyle. And right now, that's actually my most powerful team. And that is just a small fraction of what is available to you in Siralim. I haven't even talked about the Necromancer, the Spellweaver, the Rune Knight, the Shadowbringer, the Evoker, the Grove Warden, and countless other classes that you can look into and try out for yourself. Or I should say, classes that I certainly will be trying out sometime in the future as well. By this point, I was already completely hooked on the team building and class systems, but there was another realization that kept hitting me over and over again while I played. The game just does not seem to run out of things to unlock. Most RPGs eventually reach a point where you've seen most of what they have to offer. You might still be getting stronger, but the game isn't really showing you anything new. Siralim Ultimate feels different. I'm currently around floor 105 and still unlocking new things. There are exotic creatures, nether bosses, class masters, collectible cards, prophecies, and many other things I haven't even been able to unlock yet. I've heard about guild systems and who knows what else is available, but regardless, I'm always looking forward to pushing further and further and seeing what other mechanics and options unlock to me to explore. After all this time, I've realized that no single system is responsible for keeping me hooked on Siralim Ultimate. It's the way all these systems work together. Sometimes I'll spend half an hour putting together a new team idea, looking through creatures, reading traits, adjusting artifacts, making small changes, and trying to get everything working the way I imagined it would. And when it finally comes together, there's something incredibly satisfying about watching that team do exactly what it was designed to do. And sometimes it won't be so simple. You might sit there and put together what looks to be the perfect team, but not realize that actually this trait doesn't really work the way you thought it would, and you need to go back to the drawing board and make some changes. But whatever the build is, it feels rewarding because it was your idea. Also, the game can be surprisingly relaxing. Once you've put together your team, most of the time you're just exploring the realms, collecting resources, destroying enemies, and gradually building up a stockpile of materials that you know you're eventually going to need for something. There's almost always another upgrade to chase, another trait to test, or another goal waiting around the corner. And just when you start thinking your team is finally perfect, the game has a way of reminding you that it isn't. It could be another boss or a specific enemy combination you've never seen before that seems to counter your exact team. Maybe it's a realm modifier that completely changes the rules. Suddenly you might be struggling again and noticing weaknesses that you never saw before. But instead of it feeling frustrating, I usually find myself thinking about how to fix the problem. What creature could I replace? Who's the weakest link? What trait am I missing? Is there a better artifact or maybe some different spell gems that could really help out? And once that problem is solved, the cycle starts all over again. That's probably the best way I can describe Siralim Ultimate. No matter how strong your team becomes, it always feels like there's another improvement to make, another idea to test, or another goal worth chasing. That's what makes it so difficult to stop playing. Now, as much as I've enjoyed Siralim Ultimate, I don't think it's a game that everyone is going to love. One of the biggest hurdles is the amount of information the game throws at you. There are hundreds of creatures, hundreds of traits, dozens of specializations, spell gems, artifacts, resources, crafting systems, progression systems, things I haven't even seen yet, and countless interactions between all of them. For someone like me, that's part of the appeal, but I can absolutely see some players opening this game, looking at all those systems, and feeling completely overwhelmed. Many of the most important decisions you'll make come from understanding traits, perk trees, spell effects, and the way all the different mechanics interact with each other. If you're the type of player who prefers action over theory crafting, Siralim might not click with you the way it did for me. There are also some times where the progression can slow down a little bit. Sometimes you'll hit a wall and realize your team isn't strong enough to keep pushing deeper. When that happens, you'll either need to look at your build and try to improve it, or just grind a little more, gather more resources, level up your creatures, and just push through with brute force. Sometimes that might not work though, and you might have to rethink your entire strategy and maybe even build a whole new team with a different specialization to try to push through. I personally enjoy that process, but some players might see that as a little bit too much grinding. And while I don't personally mind the graphics, they're definitely functional rather than flashy. The game puts almost all of its focus into mechanics and progression, and whether that's a strength or a weakness will depend on what you're looking for. The last thing worth mentioning is that some builds can be extremely efficient. Depending on how you build your team, there may be times when combat becomes more about watching your strategy work rather than making decisions every turn. That's actually something I really like about it. My whole thing is building a team that I can just hold the attack button or the provoke button or the cast button and just watch everything die. But some players might like a more turn-based approach with some varying strategies based on each turn. And that is definitely available to you as well. None of these weaknesses are deal breakers for me. Some of them are even strengths for me, but they're worth mentioning because they will matter to certain players. If I'm being totally honest, the biggest weakness for Siralim Ultimate is how it is making me want to play only this game for the rest of my life. The entire reason I revived this channel was because I wanted to talk about games that completely pull me in and share them with other people who might end up loving them just as much as I do. Normally, after I finish a video, I'm excited to move on to the next game, which is still technically true. However, there's going to be a small part of me once this video is uploaded and everything is finished with it, deep down that tells me that I should just keep playing just this game. I want to unlock more classes, I want to build more teams, I want to see what's waiting deeper in the realms. One thing I could probably say for sure is sometime in the distant future, I will certainly come back to Siralim Ultimate and create a follow-up video of what the game is like deeper into the end game. So, after all of that, I absolutely think Siralim Ultimate is worth your time. It's one of the deepest RPGs I've ever played, one of the most satisfying team building games I've ever played, and somehow I still feel like I barely scratched the surface. If you've played Siralim Ultimate, let me know what class or build ended up hooking you the most. What's the deepest realm you've made it to? And if you're thinking about trying it, After you've given it a couple hours, come back and let me know how it's going. I'm very interested to hear your thoughts and the different ways you guys like to play the game. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button and consider subscribing for more videos like this in the future. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.